Hi, I'm Benton Stokes.
And I'm Elaine O'Rourke.
And this is Cocktail Theology. Hi there.
Hi there.
What are we drinking tonight?
We are drinking, what did we call it?
That night in Trinidad.
That night in Trinidad. Why have we not had a night in Trinidad?
I don't know.
God, we live wrong.
We do.
So that night in Trinidad is tequila. We only use 100% agave because I'm a snob that way. So it's tequila and triple sec and lime juice, and this is where it starts to get interesting. There is some mango guava passion fruit jam in there. Although I realized, having shaken this and poured it out and having come to goop at the end of it, that next time, and there will be a next time,
yes,
we're going to turn the jam into simple syrup so it's not so goopy.
Right.
And then the best part, I think, is it has smoked chili bitters.
Yeah, it really does change.
It makes everything different, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah, and then some sparkling water just because, brightens it up a little bit. Yeah. So that's what we're drinking
delicious.
Tonight. It is delicious. It's very
so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's one night in Trinidad, or that night in Trinidad.
That night in Trinidad.
Which keeps getting to me in that song from Chess.
Mm-hmm.
One night in Bangkok.
Mm-hmm.
I can't get, and I blame the drink. Actually, I blame you.
You should just blame me.
Can I do that?
Sure.
Okay.
The drink doesn't know any better. It doesn't know what its name is. It's not its fault.
This is going to be all Benton tonight, and I'm just...
It's going to be a very short podcast.
And I'm just going to nod. Yes. Say more.
Say more about that.
It'll be a holy listening podcast where I just nod and go,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Make vaguely affirmative noises.
Okay, for the record, people, if we are doing holy listening with you, if you are a client and we are sitting down together or online and we are listening in a holy way, focusing on both what the Holy Spirit is doing and on what you're saying and just taking in what you have to say, we're not also making vague affirming noises.
Or funny faces. Or running in place, doing our cardio while you're sharing what's weighing on your heart.
So now, to be completely fair, Ben and I have never done this together. So I can't speak to what he does. He may do his cardio while you're talking about, your 5-year-old loss of your teddy bear, but I won't. All right. I was writing an email to my personal email list about the retreat that's coming up on October 20th.
Yes.
Discovering the Really Real God. Encouraging people to come because I think that what we're talking about is incredibly important. Not just the God part. I mean, the God part's important.
Yep.
I'm a little attached to the God part.
Oh, me too.
But the part that I think is most important for most people is coming to understand what you actually believe.
Yeah, it's huge.
Socrates said that the unexamined life is not worth living. So we're not going to spend a lot of time in Plato and Socrates because I could go on about that for a long time too. But instead, we will use that and say, why is the unexamined life not worth living? What's the point of examining your life?
What's the point of examining your life?
I think we can't be afraid to find out what we actually believe and to do that from time to time. Now, most people think about that really only when they run into what we call the wall.
Yes.
I mean, most people only think about what they believe when they're in crisis. I mean, really believe.
Yeah.
Maybe it's useful to talk about what belief is. I define belief as the ideas that you carry around in the deep recesses of your mind that shape the way that you see the world, take in information, and act on it.
Right. So it's like an idea that you act on.
It's an idea that you act on and are willing to act on whether you know it or not.
Ah, right.
For example, maybe I go into a store looking for a shirt and I see a shirt and I say, wow, that's nice looking. So I buy it. There are a couple of things going on. There's the seeing of the shirt and buying it. So there might be a belief that this is a worthwhile shirt or that it's attractive or whatever. But there's some underlying beliefs that I don't talk about that are things like buying shirts is good. It is a good way to spend my money. The person to whom I'm giving it is worthy of my affection. Whatever those things are. Those I don't think about. Those are the ones that motivate my buying the shirt without my ever being aware, unless I think about it, my ever being aware of how they interplay with my buying of the shirt.
Right.
Okay? So the beliefs I'm interested in are the ones that we don't think about on a regular basis. Things like buying a shirt for someone I love is a good thing. It's a good expenditure of my money. And we don't think about those until we run into crisis.
Which is probably the wrong time to be thinking about those.
Well, I'm not sure it's the wrong time, but it's certainly a harder time. What are you thinking about in terms of the wrong piece?
Well, I just think that when you come up against crisis, I think knowing your beliefs, well, see, that's the thing, though. It depends on the type of crisis that you're running into.
Okay.
Many times, the crises that we're talking about, they help us define our beliefs, maybe, or they help us redefine our beliefs, maybe, because it is when some core idea that you have runs into some other either core idea that you have, or some individual that you care about a lot, or some other crisis, something going on in your own body, or something going on, whatever. And then at that point, that core idea or belief is called into question because it's bumping up against something else that's very, very real.
Exactly.
And you're confronted with the dissonance between those two things.
Right. So that's the wall.
But sometimes a crisis, like, trying to think of a crisis that you can see coming. But I mean, there are those inevitable life moments that you know are coming. And I think it helps to know what your beliefs are when you come up on those turning points or those crossroads that inevitably happen. Your kid graduates high school and is moving off to college, dealing with what you feel about them growing up, how that reflects on you, how you feel as a parent, having completed this phase of being a parent. You know, having two kids that are in college now and one that's still in high school. But I think these are things that cross my mind as they were approaching the time to do that. It wasn't like my beliefs were a surprise to me when I approached those crossroads. Now, there have been times when I've hit a wall, and at that point, yeah, my beliefs sometimes surprise me.
If a stranger came up to you on the street and said, "Is it good that your children find independence, move off, and create their own lives?" you would automatically say, "Of course."
Of course it is.
But that's not what you're coming up against, right? That's not the piece you're running up against.
Yeah, because a lot of it is the opportunity for self-reflection. And when I say opportunity, it's like, you know...
Another freaking growth opportunity.
Exactly. Because really, it's not about them at all at that moment. They've made this great accomplishment. They're going to go on to other accomplishments. I'm proud of my kids. You know, and that's not every parent's experience. I understand that too. But that was my experience, has been my experience so far. But it does give that room for reflection on, you know, what kind of dad have I been?
Okay.
Did I communicate what I wanted to? Did I instill in them the things that I think are important?
Okay.
Or was I acting on even beliefs that I may not even be aware of?
Okay. I don't remember how old I was, but I was a grown-up, and I sent my mom a card for her birthday or Christmas, I don't know, one of those. And it was something along the lines of, what is that line where you give your kid roots and hope they grow wings? It's that kind of, you know, that kind of thing. Anyway, so I sent her a card based on that kind of idea and just thanked her for rearing me to be independent and strong and capable and all of those things.
Yeah.
Didn't think anything about it other than the fact that I was really grateful. And she, next time I talked to her, she said she appreciated the card, but that she really wished that she hadn't done such a good job of it.
Yeah.
So here's the unexamined belief. Her intellectual belief was that she wanted her daughter to be independent, strong, capable. The deep belief that she was unaware of was that she wanted her daughter to be somewhat dependent, close, needing her in a different way. And so when I became independent, that wasn't the kind of relationship we had. I think that's where her intellectual understanding of what she wanted from me and her belief that deep, motivating independence is good, but what I want is this other thing. I think that's when those things kind of hit up against each other.
Sure.
I think where that could be interesting with your own kids is kind of along the lines of, what values are they coming away with?
Mm-hmm.
Are those values that I want them to have? And if not, what was my role in inculcating those, and why did I wind up inculcating those?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. I think one of the things involving values that have been instilled, one of the things that I get concerned about is relationships. Did they get a good sense of what a healthy marriage looks like? Mm-hmm. Did my sons get a good idea of how a husband should treat a wife or partner? Mm-hmm. Has my daughter gotten a good idea of how she should and can expect a man to treat her?
Mm-hmm. And that's complicated because you and their mother are divorced.
Yes.
She's remarried.
Yes.
And so there are multiple pieces of what does a good marriage look like? How should a man treat you? All of those things, right? Okay.
Right, those kinds of things. But that's probably the biggest concern that I have.
Okay.
When I think back on those years is, did I give them enough of a dad being a husband, treating his wife, treating his kids, instilling those values? Did I do that? I know I said it, and I know they heard it, but did I live it out?
It seems to me that what you're talking about is looking at this product, your children, who are a product genetically and behaviorally of your influence. And you're trying to evaluate what your influence was and whether it was what you wanted it to be.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing you grapple with is evaluating your influence, evaluating whether what you thought you were doing was in fact what you were doing, whether your ideas about child rearing and so forth have borne fruit, you know, all that kind of stuff. But it's more about evaluating your own history.
Yeah.
When I left pastoring, when I left the church in Campbell, it took me a number of years to forgive myself for my mistakes. But I was doing this whole process of evaluating the outcomes. Did I say one thing and do something else, not through any malicious intent, but through the unawareness of either how to do what I was saying I wanted to do,
right,
or of how my own behavior works out? Let me give you an example of this. In many, many, many churches, although not all churches, one of the primary concerns is getting enough people in the seats on a Sunday. Now, there are lots of reasons for this, but as a pastor, one is often judged by how many people are there on a Sunday. I have very mixed feelings about this. And as a pastor, although, you know, I wanted to share what we were doing with other people, my biggest concern, I think, I'm not sure, my biggest concern was with what kind of people we were turning out.
Yeah.
Who were my people turning out to be? It would be really interesting to know what they thought my biggest concern was. Because even if I was paying lots and lots and lots of lip service to what I really care about is how you turn out, what kind of person you are.
Yeah.
How many times of saying something like invite a friend, we didn't push on this, but invite a friend translated into get more butts in the seats.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of evaluation that I hear you talking about right now.
Yeah, it's like when you hit those moments like leaving a job, something that you were really invested in. For me, I had a small business. There were sort of two parts to that because I had a small business, a cafe, that I was running as a sole proprietorship. And then I brought in a business partner who had approached me about buying into the business. And so that was sort of one chapter closed, another one opened. And then when I left the partnership, again, another chapter and another opportunity for evaluating what had happened, how I had handled myself, And always there are challenges that you look at and you think, did I do that right? Did I handle that right? What are the repercussions of that? When I left the business, I honestly felt very proud of what I was able to do while I was there. I felt like I was able to maintain my me-ness, even when I took on a business partner who was the most unlike me person that I've ever met.
That's true.
That was some self-reflection, but I left head up, and I felt good about that. There have been transitions where I've left jobs or I've left situations where I didn't feel as good. And then you have to sort of weigh what you feel yourself or what your own reflections are on what happened. And then, like you said, what other people actually experienced. And many times we are way harder on ourselves than other people are, but sometimes other people have reasons for having the opinions they have that are negative of us or whatever. But with the kids thing, I think that's one that hits closest to home because these are my offspring and they know me really well and they've spent a whole lot of time with me and they've seen me at my best, I think, and they've seen me probably at my worst too. And you just hope that they get the stuff out of all of that. They distill it down into something that we actually want them to see and take away.
Right.
I was having a conversation with my son last night, my oldest son, and he was talking about how his brother is changing. Just how different they are now than they were when they were in high school. And it's just interesting because I've watched that relationship sort of move in close and then move out and then move back in close and then move out. It's about time for this to happen. It's a cycle. Every 2 or 3 years, they sort of part ways for a little bit and then they kind of find their way back. And that's sort of, they're in that parting ways right now. And as a dad, it's like I want to sort of hem that in and keep anybody from moving too far outside.
Okay.
But at the same time, I recognize that they're grown men now. And they are figuring out the world on their own terms and how all of us fit in it. So I think that's a scary part too as a parent, is that you worry that your kid is going to figure out, Dad doesn't need to have as big a part in my world as he used to.
Right, that's my mom.
Which, exactly, that was your mom. It's like, as a parent, you hope that you'll always have this, place of high esteem with your kids, and you do everything you can to maintain that. But at the end of the day, a relationship has two people in it.
We're leading a class right now on Sunday nights called Scars of Gold. And I remarked semi-flippantly that my goal is to mess up my daughter differently than I was messed up. To make new mistakes.
Yes.
And I think that's part of what you're talking about, right? Is if we're trying to be aware, if we're aware of where our own personalities and our own circumstances and our parents' best instincts clashed, then what we want to do is to not repeat those particular clashes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's that day when you look in the mirror and you see your parents and you're horrified. Or you say something comes out of your mouth and you say to yourself, oh my goodness, that's this person who, if they had said that to me, I would be, Yeah. The sins of the fathers are visited upon the sons, not because God is upset with the sons, but it's because that's the patterns.
That's the
that
patterns.
we
Right.
that we wind up living with, right?
Right.
So the question of how do you evaluate how well you've done or where... or even kind of mid-course. Okay, what do I need to do differently?
Yeah.
How do I shift this?
Right.
And the other piece of that's so challenging is it'd be really easy if our children or if our significant others or whomever we're in relationship with, if they weren't people.
Yeah.
I think if there's anything I've learned over the years is that I have no idea what's going on inside somebody else's head. Or in their soul or whatever. I can focus and get a lot of it. But just on the daily kind of what they're thinking about at 6:03 when they don't answer my text or they send me a text or, whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
I'm not in their head. And we come to each other as this massive complexity.
Oh, yeah.
of mind and ideas and beliefs and desires and hurts and healings and all that stuff. And then we interact.
Uh-huh.
And it's like this huge container of rot and ribbon and all of this stuff, and it like bumps into another container and something splashes over. And you always hope that the ribbons are going to splash over, but very often it's the fish heads. You know what I mean? It's like whoosh.
Right.
And so then we back off from those, and if we're paying attention, we say, huh, well, that didn't go the way I expected it to.
Exactly.
When you were talking about leaving the cafe and evaluating it, how you had done and how you had been during that time, I was so glad to hear it, first of all. But I was struck by, on any particular day, that may not have been at all how you felt.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So part of the paying attention to ourselves, acknowledging ourselves, making course corrections, is also about not living in our failures.
That's a huge part of it.
Because on any particular day, I might fail miserably at something. If I keep living in that failure, forward is over.
Yeah.
And so part of what we have to do is to accept that failure is a necessary precursor to success.
Mm-hmm.
Acknowledge it, evaluate it, try and shift it, understand that we're going to shift it sometimes, other times we're not, go back and reshift it. You know, it's that over and over and over again.
Yep.
A number of our listeners have small children. I won't mention any names, Kyle, but some of them, a lot of them do. As you would just point out, you're always kind of looking at, I hope that what our listeners are doing is at least from time to time going, could I do that better? Could I do it differently? Wow, what button just got pushed to mine?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
There are things that my daughter can do that are annoying, but they don't upset me. Right? It's like, come on, you know, that kind of thing. There are other things where she does it and I'm just like, I wouldn't say rage, but certainly some flood of emotion comes up and I have to be conscious of and kind of squelch it or say, I am too angry to talk with you right now. I need 30 seconds to just kind of come, you know, that being aware of it and not getting then caught in the sense that you are doomed or you've doomed your child or you've doomed, you know, doomed your part, whatever the thing is.
Right.
It's a tough one.
It's a very tough one. It's really hard for us to give ourselves grace sometimes.
To a different parent-child relationship for a minute. You know where I'm going with this. So the heavenly parent and the earthly child, the complexities of the whole God-Jesus relationship. But if you want to take it as a father-son, which is the way Jesus described it.
Yes.
You think God ever said to God's self, dang it, I wish I'd done that better? Or if that's too hard to deal with, I think Jesus ever said, I realize these are complicated because you have to figure out what you think about Jesus, but do you think Jesus ever said, I so wish I'd done that differently. How could I do that differently next time?
I feel pretty confident that Jesus did that.
Okay, why?
Because I don't think that you can go through life really, really caring about people and not look back on something that you said or did without thinking, could I have been kinder? Could I have been gentler? Could I have been more loving? Could I have demonstrated how I feel and care about that person in a way that would have come across better? I don't think Jesus went into life assuming he would always be perfect. I don't think Jesus, as a teenage boy, thought that everything he did was right. And I don't think his mother thought everything that he did was right. And I can't help but believe that in the last 3 years of his life, that he would have walked around thinking that everything he did was absolutely perfect. I just don't think that was Jesus' point of view. I have a feeling that Jesus probably second-guessed himself just as we do.
There are a couple of scenes in the Gospels that are interpreted in all kinds of ways to read Jesus as inherently perfect, even if he wasn't aware of it. Okay? So imagine for the moment, this isn't in Scripture, but imagine for the moment the teenage Jesus feeling as though he had not handled something as well as it could have been, and yet, as he's traipsing through the daisies are growing behind him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Right.
So one of them is that whole example where the woman asks him for something and he sounds quite curt and says, really, that's just for my people. And she says, even the master gives the dog under the table crumbs, right?
Yeah.
And then it seems in the gospel that he kind of shifts his attitude, right? That's one of those places where it looks like Jesus maybe said something, backs up, and then goes, maybe I could have handled that better.
Yeah.
I have heard the argument made more than once that way of reading it is simply misunderstanding what's going on. Jesus was being facetious or using a teaching tool or whatever, rather than the simple interaction where he appears to change his mind.
Yeah.
To say that Jesus changed his mind or actually caught himself in the act of or after the fact of doing something that could have been better says a lot about our view about Jesus.
Oh, it absolutely does. Yeah. What I've come to understand is that for me, the part of Jesus that connects so deeply with me is Jesus' humanity. The thing that makes Jesus' divinity special is the fact that Jesus was also human.
Right.
He wasn't simply God's surrogate placed among us to be perfect and then to die to pay some cosmic debt. That's not the way that I understand Jesus at all. And so the power that I see in Jesus comes from his humanity. Jesus would not have been able to relate to the folks that followed him, to the woman that touched the hem of his garment, to the man that was lowered into the pool of Bethesda, every encounter, the wedding in Cana, all of it, he would not have responded the way that he did, I'm convinced, if he hadn't also been fully human.
So do you think there was a time, or many times, that Jesus looked at his adoptive father, Joseph, or looked at his heavenly father and said, I messed up, I am really sorry? Or, alternately, didn't say that, but knew that he had and felt guilty about it?
I tend to think that Jesus wasn't somebody that carried guilt around.
Okay. Which says something about your beliefs about guilt.
So I tend to think that Jesus, if he recognized that there was something that he could have done better, or something that he did outright wrong, that he would have straight away dealt with that.
Okay.
Asked forgiveness from whomever he needed to ask forgiveness from.
Gotten the forgiveness and been done.
Right. I tend to think that's the way that Jesus would have responded to something like that. And of course, we don't have any accounts of that in Scripture. And who knows if he ever confronted that. But I do think that there must have been times when Jesus wondered, like turning the tables over in the temple, getting pissed off at the money changers. I wonder if there were times when he thought, either, I was a little too harsh, or I really should have lowered the boom. I really should have called down angels. I really should have lit this place up. That's one of those situations where you feel like Jesus could have second guessed and said, wow, I could have done that differently. I could have made my point another way.
See, and this is, someday we're going to just have to talk about what we think God is like. But I'm imagining God in his, using all of these pronouns and everything advisedly, God in his relationship as the Father of Jesus.
Yes.
I can imagine God's sort of restraining his own awareness in order to see what his son was going through.
Yeah.
The challenge of the father-son relationship, or one of the many challenges of the father-son relationship between God and Jesus, is if we think that God is omniscient, knows everything, and chooses to exercise that all the time, it'd be very hard to relate to Jesus the human.
Right.
Can you imagine being Jesus and having the kind of father who could say something like, okay, son, it was obvious you were going to do that. Had you only talked to me, I could have spared you the pain of that. And like, the dad's being right every single time.
Yeah.
You'd want to cut off your own head.
Right.
Because there's nothing worse than a parent who consistently says, I told you so. I told you so. Right? Okay, so taking the father-son relationship between God and Jesus, and just assuming for a moment that God withheld God's powers of omniscience and omnipotence, that God chose not to know what was going to happen, chose not to act, so that Jesus could become who he was and make mistakes and learn from them and become better. Then it becomes a father-son relationship that the rest of us can actually pay attention to.
Yeah.
So as you're watching your sons turn into men, divide from each other, come back to each other, advise when it makes sense, but stand back and let them screw it up.
Yep.
That's where your own relationship with your heavenly Father, as well as your earthly father, can be so informative. Right? The fact that God lets you mess up, and God also supports you, and God also will be there and guide you out of it, but doesn't stop you from making errors.
Yeah.
And then when you look back, you can say, God really helped me through that. And I'm the one who made the choices to do X, Y, and Z. And it worked.
And that's, I think, where I have come to fairly recently in my faith journey, is taking ownership of choices that I made that actually moved me in the correct direction. It was like I had no problem taking the blame for the stuff that didn't work out the way that I wanted it to, or that I thought it would, or mistakes that I made.
Didn't you write a song about this?
Oh, so many songs. But I'm now getting to the point where I understand, like even I'm noticing in my prayer life how that's changed how I pray a little bit. Instead of God, do this for me, it's more like, God, I really want to make the right choice about this. Just help me make the right choice. And understanding that, I'll own the choice. And if it's the right choice, then I'll be like, I made the right choice. And that way I'm not blaming anybody if I make the wrong choice. And I'm not even blaming myself, because I'm taking the choice to God before I even make it.
It's what you and God are doing together.
Right.
So as a father with sons who are grown-ups, or getting very close to being grown-ups, who think of themselves as grown-ups, whether or not they really are.
Sure.
I'm not sure anybody's ever completely a grown-up. But as a father looking at grown-up sons, how could that sense of this is what we're doing together help you navigate this time of change and development and growth and all of that with them?
Well, I think there's two things. I want to and need to be able to trust them, but so much of that is tied around my ability to trust that I did okay. Because I take ownership in the kind of people that they are.
Bad or good?
Bad or good. So, I feel partly responsible, and I see myself in my sons. And I see the way...
For better and worse.
For better and for worse, right. So I take some credit and I take some blame. And I think for us to share ownership in those kinds of choices, right, it means that I trusted myself enough to say that I reared them okay. So if they're quality people, it's because I did an okay job. If I'm down on myself and I think that I did a crappy job, then it's going to be difficult for me to trust them as adults, because I didn't instill them with the right stuff.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. So you went from, if they do something okay, then you can take some credit. But if you don't feel good, if you're not taking some credit, if you're not monitoring your own sense of self, then you're not going to be able to affect them in a good way.
Right.
That's not where I thought the second half of that sentence was going to go. Because the first half of the sentence was, if they do okay, you can take some credit. The usual second half of the sentence...
And if they screw up, then...
You can take some blame.
And that's true.
But what was interesting, though, and this gets back to Jesus. What's interesting, though, is where you went was, if you don't have some peace with yourself, if you don't have some self-examination, some struggling with how you did,
Yeah.
and coming to some peace in that, then you can't trust them, because you're going to constantly be thinking, I have messed this up. They are messed up. I need to watch over them. You would be helicopter dad if you completely thought that you had messed up.
Yeah. Right.
So
Right.
what you have to do is to come to some sense of peace so that you can allow them and trust them to do what they need to do.
Right.
Okay, so I'm going to throw out just a whole theological thing to you.
Right.
In the Gospels, Jesus gets baptized by John.
Right.
And there are varying interpretations by the Gospel writers of what happened next. But in all of them, in some way, the Holy Spirit shows up and a voice from the heavens says, "This is my beloved Son," or "You are my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased."
Right.
I wonder if that moment, if we couldn't interpret that, if we couldn't read that for the purpose of our own lives, as God saying, I've got some peace with this. I can let you become who you're going to be.
That's what it feels like to me. It's like when you have those, when as a dad I have those conversations with my sons. They don't happen very often, but like that real deep attaboy. That's not just like a, hey, you did good. But more like, I'm really proud of you. Like, you've accomplished some really great things. You know, it's that kind of moment I can trust.
I can trust you with this next part of your journey that is going to be hell for you and for everybody in many ways. And heaven for you and everybody in many ways.
Yeah, and then I would think that Jesus would take that as a great sense of healthy pride. My dad thinks I'm okay.
My dad's proud of me.
Yeah.
My dad's well pleased.
Yeah.
I hope that's the way Jesus experienced that. I really hope that at that moment, God was daddy. God was beaming, and that he felt the beaming. Like, you have done exactly the right thing, my child.
Yeah.
You didn't have to, and you did, and I am so proud of you. And I can cut the apron strings and let you go forward.
Yeah.
I like that.
I like that too.
Okay, then there's the truth of the Gospels. For all of you. For those of you who are worried about whether we teach correct doctrine or not, we have now exposed the actual meaning of the baptism by John and God's pronouncement.
Yes. So glad we could do that for everyone.
I'm so exhausted.
I know. I need another cocktail.
And that seems like a good time to change over to this. So yeah, so we can do that. We can give you another night in Trinidad.
Yeah, another night in Trinidad. So funny. Okay, we have our retreat coming up October 20th. Discovering the Really Real God.
We do.
In Nashville, Tennessee.
We do. I was on Facebook Live today because I don't know why, because I'm a masochist. But I went on Facebook Live and I said to folks, look, if you want to be here and you don't have a place to stay, or the cash flow is going to be a problem, or you're afraid that you can't do 13 hours, you're going to need to take a nap in the middle of the day, please contact us.
Yeah.
We'd much rather have you here and figure out how to make that work than to not have you here and miss out on discovering who you are, what you believe, discovering the really real God who loves you and either has already or wants to or is continually saying, "You are my beloved child."
Yeah.
Keep on going.
Yep.
You know, we want you to find that God. So if you want to do this and something's standing in your way, please, why don't you just email me? That's Elaine, ELANE, @schoolforseekers.com, or info@schoolforseekers.com, or Ben at School. Basically, get in touch with us. Let's try and figure that out, because we really want you here.
We do.
Because your relationship with everybody is so important to us.
Yep.
And then, you know, if you like what we're doing here and want to support the ongoingness of this podcast, you can do that by going to www.patreon, that's patreon.com/cocktail theology, and giving to us on a monthly basis. We would love that. Also, writing reviews on
Yeah.
iTunes, writing reviews on Stitcher, telling people about us, sharing the
Subscribing.
podcast, subscribing, passing us along.
Yeah. All that stuff helps, y'all.
It very much helps. And, if you come across something that we say or we do that spurs some idea for conversation or that you think might make somebody else's life a little bit easier, please pass it along. Even if they never listen to us again, if we can be of use, we want to be useful to people.
We do.
So,
And if there's topics that you guys want to hear us talk about, let us know.
please, because we'll talk about just about anything.
It's true.
It is true. So back to Trinidad.
Back to Trinidad.
Okay. Have a good night, everybody, or a good day, or whatever it is
Whenever
you're
you're
doing.
listening,
Have a good
one.
Bye.